Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. And next I am doing day 4 of the Derek Chauvin trial. Another emotional roller coaster of a day really, and I can't see it getting any easier. And the first witness is Courtney, and she was George Floyd's girlfriend, and she was his girlfriend right up until he died. And they ask her how she met him, and her eyes just light up. She smiles. Of course she's upset, but you can see how fondly she remembers him. Yeah, it was sad. And she met him at the Salvation Army when he was security there, and they were in a relationship for nearly 3 years. And they move on to when George's mum died and how hard he found that, how much he struggled with that. He was a mummy's boy. So that was really hard to hear. I mean, it wasn't long that he'd lost his mum before he died. And she also had an opioid addiction, so, you know, they both would stay clean for a while and then they'd both relapse and take pills together. And she did actually speak to him the day before he died. He never, even when he was taking pills, he never complained of breathlessness or ever said he had trouble breathing. So it wasn't, you know, an ongoing thing that happened on the day he died. And George had COVID in March. So they quickly go over George's friend, the guy that I spoke about yesterday, who's trying to invoke his Fifth Amendment right. And he's one of the people they would get their pills from sometimes. And a time in March, Courtney had to take George to the hospital because he was having severe stomach pain to the point he could barely walk. And later she found out that it was actually an overdose, but she did not know he'd taken heroin as well. George and Courtney had some pills off the street. I mean, sometimes they would get prescription pills and sometimes they had to get them elsewhere, and they did get some one time, and Courtney said they looked different to what they normally did, and they affected her a lot differently and actually kept her up all night. I mean, she takes opioids for chronic pain. I suffer with chronic pain. I'm on pain pills, and the minute she said pain pills normally relax me, I knew exactly what she meant, because when you've got constant pain and you take a pain pill and the pain just lifts, it's so nice. So she obviously rightly knew the difference between a proper opioid pill and one that just obviously isn't, that kept her up all night. They talk again about the night she took him to the hospital, and she did notice a white foam at the corner of his mouth, but she says it was dry. Now, I don't think it's the same as what they were trying to make it out to be, because, you know, when he was on the ground on the day he died, he was foaming at the mouth. I think it was more a case of that he had a bit of a dry mouth, and we all get that white scummy stuff in the corner of our mouth sometimes, so it might have just been that. They got more pills in May, which reminded her of the same feeling she's had before. So I don't know what they had taken. I don't think she does either. But she doesn't know if they were the same ones as she'd taken before. And this was a week before George died. The pills that made Courtney stay up all night, they made George be full of energy, but there was no other issues. And, you know, as she's talking about her addiction and everything, I just sat and looked at her, and, you know, she's talking about losing her boyfriend in awful circumstances, and then she's having to sit there in front of all these people, and it's being broadcast around the world, and she's putting all her personal business out there, and that really, really cannot be easy. And I think most of the witnesses are handling themselves really well, despite what they've been through, despite Mr. Nelson from the defence trying to pick apart everything and trying to get them to admit things that they didn't see or whatever. I think they're just doing really well. So next up, we have one of the paramedics, and he was one of those that responded to the call for George. And initially it was a code 2 for someone with a mouth injury, and a code 2 is just a routine call. There's no rush, no lights, no sirens. And then about a minute and a half later it got upgraded to a code 3. And when he got to the scene, he assumed that there was still a struggle going on because he saw all the police officers restraining George. And from his viewpoint, at the back of the ambulance, he says George didn't appear to be breathing. So after this witness's partner had gone to look at George, he walked back over to him and asked him if he was in cardiac arrest, and his partner said, "I think so." So they explained why they loaded George into the ambulance the way they did, because it did look like they really didn't care. It was because they did it to give him treatment as quickly as possible, as their equipment was all on the back of the ambulance, plus the crowd. So as Genevieve said, you know, it's a load and go. They just want to get him and get out of there and park somewhere safe so they can perform treatment. And they show a photograph of where they went and parked up. So they were attempting resuscitation. You get to see them, pictures of what they were doing, and he says, you know, George flatlined. And they show pictures of them trying to resuscitate him, but George's condition still hadn't changed by the time they got to the hospital. The other paramedic that went to look at George said his chest didn't appear to be moving, and he didn't detect a pulse, and he thought he was dead. He was eager to get George in the truck and get away from the area to give him treatment as soon as possible. He did say the officers were helpful when moving George to the ambulance. And the defence questioned him about where he noticed where Chauvin's knee was. Trying to get him to say that it wasn't on his neck, it were on his back, but he didn't really take that much notice. He was just concentrating on George. So now we've done the two paramedics, we now move on to the captain of the Minneapolis Fire Department, and he attended the scene but got there after the ambulance and everything had left, and he didn't realise this, and he went into Cup Foods to try and find the patient that he got the call for. And obviously Genevieve was still there, the bystander firefighter that tried to help George. And after she briefly told him what had gone on, he went to go find the ambulance to help them with treatment. He did actually send his team back to check on Genevieve to see if she was okay. Sorry about that, my video just freezes sometimes, I don't know why, it's very annoying. So as I was saying, he sent his team back to check on Genevieve to see if she was okay. After everything had got, you know, George had got to the hospital and everything, he did report this incident to his supervisors, because obviously someone had died in police custody. So now we have the shift sergeant, and he's Derek Chauvin's shift sergeant, and they go through all the training that they go through, and he confirms what the training they go through, and obviously it slaps you in the face, everybody knows it, that everything those officers do, they should not have done. They should... And they knew what they shouldn't have done and why, and what could happen if they didn't do it right. So Chauvin has worked on his shift and has been since 2008, but he'd never socialised with him outside of work. The same with Officer Tao, but he'd known him since 2005. And if you remember from the 911 call operator, she actually reported what she was seeing on the TV, and it was this witness that she reported it to. And then when he called Chauvin to find out what was going on, we actually hear him talking, and I don't know about you, but Chauvin sounded really nervous. But he did tell, Chauvin told his supervisor that George had been combative. I didn't see combative, I saw absolutely petrified and scared and anxious. There was nothing combative. So the supervisor went to the scene, and Chauvin told him that he knelt on George's neck. He didn't tell him for how long. So now Mr. Nelson is still trying to pin George as a big, bad criminal, and that those officers had no other option than to handle it the way they did. I get he's trying to defend his client, but when the whole world's watching these videos and seeing the training that these officers have to go through, what they did was wrong, but you cannot explain that away. And the supervisor actually testified that once George was no longer resisting, those officers should have got off him. So you can spin it whichever way you want, but nobody can deny the fact that what they did was wrong and they should have got off him, and we wouldn't be here now. George would still be alive. And remember, folks, this was all over a $20 bill. George had no weapons. He was scared. He was anxious. And now he's dead. Just wrong. So I think it's a short day tomorrow. They've got things to go through in the afternoon, so I think it's only just for the morning. So it will be a shorter video tomorrow. But thank you all for watching. See you all tomorrow. Bye for now.